Good evening. I'm Linn Clancey with League of Voters of Linn County, and the League is a nonprofit volunteer organization which neither supports nor opposes any candidate or political party. I know that's really odd in this election season. The League encourages citizen participation in government and is open to any citizen of 16 years of age or older. This forum is part of our voter education efforts to help voters make informed decisions at the upcoming elections. And we hope that over the course of this program, you will learn more about the candidates and what they hope to do for our county. So, welcome to this particular candidates forum between incumbent Brian Gardner and challenger Rick Stewart, who are both running for the office of Linn County Sheriff. I will start by explaining some procedures for the forum, which each candidate received ahead of time. So, here are instructions for both candidates and the audience. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes for a closing statement, and 2 minutes to answer each question in between those two. Opening and closing statements will be done in the following order. Brian Gardner will go first and Rick Stewart will go second. And when they close, it will be the opposite. Rick Stewart will go first and Brian Gardner will go second. Is this cutting in and out?
Yes. It is.
I can hear it. Can you hear me if I don't use it? Do you need to use it for taping purposes? Robin or?
No, you're fine with me.
Okay. I'll do my best. Okay. The timekeepers are sitting in the front row, and when there is a half a minute left on speaking time, the timekeeper will hold up a card that says 30 seconds, indicating you obviously have 30 seconds in which to finish your answer. At 15 seconds, the timekeeper will hold up a card that says 15 seconds. And then when you see the stop sign, please wrap up your comments as quickly as possible. If you continue speaking after the stop sign is held up, I will say thank you very much and hopefully move on to the next speaker. Candidates will confine their statements and responses to relevant issues and refrain from any personal attacks. This forum is being recorded by Robin Cash in the back of Neighborhood Network News and will be available to watch at the LWVLinnCounty.org website and www.neighborhoodnetworknews.com. Also, it's being filmed by Landon Sheets over here with Pro Video, and Pro Video will be streaming this live on the Pro Video Facebook page. So if you want to see forums, or if you know of anybody else that had to miss them, please ask them to tune in to any of those websites. If you have not done so already, please turn off or silence your cell phone. And if at any time during the forum you cannot hear either me or either of the candidates, please let us know by raising your hand. We request that you treat both candidates fairly and remain quiet throughout the forum. No clapping, cheering, or calling out, with the exception that after their closing statements, you may clap for both candidates if you wish. You are encouraged to submit questions. This is, after all, your forum to ask the questions you would like to ask. So questions must be addressed to all of the candidates, not just one or the other, and must apply to issues or qualifications for their particular office. Raise your hand if you'd like another piece of paper or to have your question collected, and a league panel over here will review the questions for legibility, clarity, and applicability to both candidates. I will read as many questions as time allows, sometimes having to combine similar questions in an effort to cover a variety of topics. So we will start with the candidates' opening statements. And as I mentioned before, Brian Gardner will go first. So you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Lee. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for allowing us to have this opportunity today to speak before the voters. I think that when you have a contested race, that it is vitally important that the candidates are able to speak before the public so that the public's able to make an informed decision before heading to the booths. So I appreciate that opportunity and appreciate you allowing me to be here today. As many of you may know, that I've been basically an adult long member of the Linn County Sheriff's Office. I'm currently in my 36th year with the department. I'm in my second term as sheriff, hopefully moving into my third term. And during that time, I actually started pretty much what is referred to as the basement of the department. I came in as a volunteer, as an Explorer Scout. I became a radio dispatcher as a civilian. I became a reserve officer, became a deputy, and worked my way up through the ranks before becoming a major or an appointed rank of second deputy before finally being elected sheriff in 2008, being sworn into office on January 1st of 2009, and have held that position since then. I'm very fortunate to be able to lead the men and women of the Linn County Sheriff's Office as they provide an important role of providing public safety to the citizens of Linn County. I take this job very seriously, and I know my employees take this job very seriously as well. And we understand the importance of providing good, solid law enforcement protection to the citizens of Linn County, and I will assure you that as we move forward into my third term in office, we will continue to do so. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to say I was raised to take my hat off in the house, but tonight I'm leaving it on so that you can tell me from him. I started in law enforcement. I got fired after 2 years because I refused to shave my beard when a 72-year-old mayor decided he didn't like the way it looked, even though the older mayor before him thought it was okay. That's all right. I had 2 great years. I went into a career in private business. I started a company that has 300 employees. It's a $180 million business today. I didn't own it. I started it as a cooperative. I'm a very cooperative fellow. So I didn't get rich off of it, but I made enough money to retire when I was 48 and a half. And I've spent the last, whatever that is, 16 years traveling the world, seeing a lot of different things, hiking the Appalachian Trail, riding my bike 3,000 miles across the state of Iowa 2 years ago, working at an orphanage in Guatemala, taking tourists up volcanoes, bringing them back down again, taking their money, putting 110% of the budget, $250,000 a year, into an orphanage and a school with 175 poor kids in it. I'm in this race for one reason only. It's not because I need the job or the headaches or the money. It's not because I have any disrespect for Mr. Gardner or the work he's done or any of the men in the department or any of the other law enforcement officials in Cedar Rapids, in Linn County, and in the entire state of Iowa. But we have a problem. That problem started with President Nixon when he declared we had to have a war on drugs. Well, guess what? The war is over. And drugs won. This is what the war on drugs has given us. Osama bin Laden got his money from our war on drugs. You can look at the book I brought with me afterwards if you don't believe that. North Korea is building nuclear missiles, nuclear bombs, putting them on long-range missiles so that they can aim them at the United States, and they get their money from our war on drugs.
Thank you. Okay, the first question will be to Mr. Stewart, and perhaps you could enhance on what you've been talking about. Would you please identify the top 5 priorities you have in running for this office?
My number one priority is to begin the process of stopping and ending permanently the war on drugs. That's my absolute number one priority. I like to say there's nothing wrong with law enforcement that can't be fixed by ending the war on drugs. And there's nothing wrong with law enforcement that can be fixed unless we end the war on drugs. Now, given that, you have to understand I will inherit everybody that works for Mr. Gardner today, and I hope I'll inherit him. Good people that know how to do the job and know how to get the job done. My job is not to come in and tell them what to do, because it doesn't work. I know what it's like to try and get 300 people to do what I tell them to do it, and I gave up on that years ago. But what I do plan on doing is sitting down with each and every one of them in small groups, big groups, all together, whatever it takes, and talking, much more than we can talk tonight, presenting evidence, discussing back and forth. Because we need to get a consensus in this county that the war on drugs is bad for us, which it is. That's my absolute number one priority. After that, I want to get rid of the entrails of the war on drugs, the things that the war on drugs has caused us to do wrong. There are many of them But you can't do that. You simply cannot cure these problems until you get rid of the war on drugs. And of course I'd like to be president, in which case I would end it today. Or maybe the governor, I could end it in Iowa. But the truth of it is, we have to start somewhere. And the place to start is here, right here in Linn County. We can be the guy that cracked one rock out of the Berlin Wall one day. It had stood there for years, and one guy took one rock out, and 3 days later, it was gone. We can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner.
I think we have several issues that are of large concern to us currently in law enforcement. First of which is the mental health crisis that we're experiencing, not only in Linn County, but state and even nationwide. County jails have become the largest provider of mental health services in the nation. And I run a 401-bed jail. I have my jail administrator with me here tonight, and we provide the largest amount of mental health services in this city. I can tell you assuredly that we are not prepared to do that. We are not supposed to be doing that. We're not designed to do that, but we do it. We are fortunate that we actually have mental health nurses, mental health doctors that do visit our jail on a continual basis. We provide a large number of psychotropic medications to our inmates, doctor prescribed, to help deal with this issue. Because they can't find treatment on the streets, or because if they're released to the streets, they don't have the ability to either pay for or willingness to go to the treatment, that's a large issue for us. We also have a heroin epidemic that we're dealing with currently in Linn County, and even nationwide, that we're having a difficult time addressing. We even have a deputy assigned to the task force and an ability, in the hopes of finding the ability to cease that problem. Gun violence in Cedar Rapids, as we all know, is now at a high. We're trying to work with the community leaders in Cedar Rapids. I happen to serve on a task force with the police chief, Wayne German, at his request. Keeping up with technology is always a big issue for us. What we don't want to have is that the bad guys or the bad girls have more technology, better technology than we do, because it puts us at a disadvantage. So we always try to make sure the technology that we have is appropriate for maintaining public safety. And obviously, all this has to be done within budget constraints. So the budget is always an important concept for us. We need to be mindful of the budget and make sure that we adhere to the budget constraints that we have.
Thank you. As a follow-up on that, Mr. Gardner, you'll go first. How do you feel about technology and its use in law enforcement? And what specific technology would you continue to use, and what would you like to see added?
Well, technology, as I stated, is vitally important to the provision of public safety. As you folks may very well know, we recently established a countywide radio system in Linn County, which enables all emergency responders, both police, fire, and EMS, to seamlessly communicate with each other. This is something we were lacking desperately during the 2008 flood, and it was very apparent. We actually jumped onto a system that Johnson County already had, making this a corridor system. And we're currently in the process of making this a regional radio system, because soon Black Hawk County and Iowa counties will be joining us, with the potential to have Dubuque County and other neighboring counties jump on at some point in time. That regional system is great because we don't operate just within the confines of Linn County, no more than the bad guys confined within the regional issues of Linn County. People travel, we travel. And so having that communication ability is vitally important. We have updated mobile data computers in our vehicles. That allows us to spend more time on the street and less time in the office doing paperwork. We also have emergency mapping that comes up with those MDCs, mobile data computers, so we can actually look at a glance to see where it is that we're supposed to be going. We have emerging technologies all the time. We have emerging fingerprint technologies. We have emerging facial recognition technology. We're looking at having fingerprint capturing devices on the street, so we can actually record a person's fingerprint and see immediately, if that person's already in the system, who he or she may be. So it's extremely important for us to maintain that edge and have the technology available to us and look toward new communication or new technology at all times. We don't want to overlook body cameras. That's certainly a buzzword now. We are in the process of purchasing body cameras for all deputies that are outside of the jail. The jail's already covered with cameras, but outside, all we have right now are the in-car cameras. We want to be purchasing body cameras for all deputies who work outside of the jail, so that we can be transparent, so we can make sure that we're doing proving to the public we're doing everything within our possibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. And Mr. Stewart?
Same question?
Same question.
Technology?
Yes.
I love technology. I'm pretty sure I've been ahead of the curve for the first 3/4 of my life and behind the curve for the last quarter of my life. The curve is really getting curvy. I'm also very skeptical when people want to buy technology, and I'm not speaking directly to the Sheriff's Department or Brian. In my company, the best thing I ever did was not buy most of the technology that everybody else wanted. And I saved literally millions of dollars on an annual basis by using better technology that was at a lower level that we knew how to work. We had phenomenal technology, but we didn't pay through the nose for it. I think that the stuff that's happening on this phone is probably the most important technology for law enforcement. I stand to be corrected. This is the kind of stuff I love to talk about. But I noticed that their Linn County is putting in a $80,000 or $85,000 emergency push button thing in their county offices so that you can go right to the Sheriff's Department if there's a problem. Well, I have one of those on my phone. It's an app. It's free. You could set the whole thing up in a couple of hours. Everybody can learn how to use it in a minute. That's the kind of stuff that's happening. The other thing we do sometimes is we get trapped into this future of fantastic technology, and we spend money long before it's cheap. And in the government, we should spend it after it's cheap. Okay, there's fantastic technology. I love the facial recognition stuff. I'm a little hesitant on the fingerprinting. I don't really see, I'd rather get fewer people in the system than fingerprint everybody to find out if they're in the system. But I'm a technology buff. I pay a lot of attention. Pretty sure I can handle any technological problems that come to the Sheriff's Department. But to be perfectly honest, I'm probably going to download them to Brian.
Okay, thank you. All right, and this question, Mr. Stewart, you will go first. It has to do with education. What education and/or law enforcement training do you possess that qualifies you to lead the Sheriff's Office? And what have you done to prepare yourself to attend the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy as is mandated by Iowa Code?
Okay, so when I became a law enforcement official, it was right when the academy had started, and 2 years later, I had not gotten to the top of the list. That was how training was taken at the time. Here's what I think is the bad news. We've got a lot of training. It's probably the wrong training. We probably need to untrain ourselves a lot, because the training has done things like change our vocabulary. The training has caused us to use words like the bad guys. That needs to go. We can't have law enforcement if there's the bad guys and the good guys. This is not war. We do not have a foreign country that we are at war with. Everybody is a good guy, and there's some good guys that do bad things. And there's some good guys that do really, really, really bad things. And there's a couple of bad guys. I would estimate 1 out of 10,000 in the country. And they really are bad guys. But we cannot think that way. We have to think an entirely different way. We need to think about serving and protecting everybody, every single citizen. And that doesn't happen with the training that we have at the academy. Not that I've been there. But I am well ready to take that training. I will love it. There's nothing I like better than being trained. And what have I done to prepare for it? I've been studying all my life. I work out. I stay in pretty good shape. I shoot. I pay attention. I can't wait.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner.
Well, I think the training is certainly an ongoing thing that all of our employees, it's not just something you do in the academy, you do it throughout your career. And I've made it a point to ensure that my employees are provided with as much training as we can actually afford that is specific to their job requirements. Myself personally, to answer the question specifically, I have a BA in Criminal Justice Administration from Mount Mercy. I have a master's degree in Public Administration, Criminal Justice from City University. I've attended the 10-week FBI National Academy. I attended the week-long National Sheriff's Institute. I am certified as a national, as a statewide EMT. I have a Homeland Protection certification through the National Sheriff's Association. And I think that the training is important enough that I've also have all my command level employees attending either the FBI National Academy or also the Northwestern School of Police Staff and Command. In addition, we have definitely increased the training that we provided to our deputies since I took over. It was one of my campaign issues, and we continue to provide more training as we speak. I belong to the Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association. I'm currently the immediate past president. I'm the chairperson of the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy Council. I'm the chairperson of the Linn County E911 Service Board. I'm the chairperson of the Linn County Emergency Management Commission. I'm the current chairperson of the Linn County Radio Governance Board. So I understand that with this position comes responsibility. And it's not just the responsibility to lead, it's also the responsibility to learn and properly direct. And I think that ongoing training, ongoing education is important to make sure that I can properly lead my employees and assist them in leading my agency once I'm gone.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Gardner, let's stay on training. How are your officers trained? And are they trained to avoid lethal force? Is there a protocol to avoid the use of multiple shots, for example?
Well, multiple shots specifically are a situation-specific incident. So I can't really address that without having a specific incident. But what I can tell you is that we've recently purchased updated electronic stunning devices, we'll call them, electronic control devices. The brand name is Taser. We recently have upgraded our tasers to make sure that we're using the latest available technology from that company. That's a less lethal technology that we have that we are able to use as an additional tool outside of the use of lethal force. Now, I have to be honest with you. Sometimes we encounter things that require us to use lethal force. When someone is in the midst of actually creating or using force that is deadly in nature, they pull a handgun on us, they use a knife against someone else, and they refuse to stop when directed. Really, the only way to stop those situations oftentimes is the use of deadly force. But we also have many tools available to us that are less lethal. We have the tasers, we have expandable batons, we have pepper spray. And beyond the actual tools that we have, we are currently teaching our folks, and we have for a year or two, de-escalation techniques, which help talk down situations. And what we're looking very forward to is, come next month, I'm sending a group of my employees down to Texas that are receiving crisis intervention team training. They're going to learn to establish and identify people who are in crisis. And rather than escalate a situation, we're looking to de-escalate a situation so that we can also avoid the use of force and talk our way through situations. As law enforcement officers, we're used to rushing into the scene, taking control of it as soon as possible, clearing it up, and then walking back out the door. That's counterproductive for a crisis, because a person in crisis doesn't have the ability to reason. So I'm very much looking forward to having our folks go get the CIT training. They'll do the train the trainer course, bring it back to the department, and then train the rest of us. My immediate goal is to have at least one person on every shift that's trained in CIT to be able to address these issues with people in crisis.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart? Training.
You know, the kind of stuff that I just heard is what we did 40 years ago. That's what happened when we left the track of, Andy of Mayberry. The guy that knew everybody in town, he knew every crime in town, that he knew how to solve every problem because he was extremely well connected. The drug war drove us apart. The drug war drove us in two entirely different directions. And that's why there's so many citizens that don't trust the police, and that's why there's so many police that call citizens the bad guys. We are one country, we are one people. There is not a difference between us. Some of us need to be helped to become good guys every day. They tend to be boys between the ages of 14 and 34. They are not bad boys. They are not bad people at all. They're in the process of becoming men, and our job is to help them do that while protecting the people that aren't between those ages and that happen to be female. That can happen. We can get there, but we need to get there by setting a goal that's different than the current goals that we have. We can get there with leadership, and I believe every law enforcement officer in this county, in this state, and this nation wants to do what I want them to do. I know law enforcement. We are good people. We don't need to be trained until we understand what our real job is. And our real job is exactly what it says. It's protect and serve every single citizen. That's attainable because we used to have it.
Okay, as a kind of a follow-up to part of your comments on that one, Mr. Stewart, if elected, how will you handle the drug war? Please explain in specific terms how you will make that happen, and do you favor legalizing marijuana?
My platform is not to legalize marijuana, but it will be a byproduct of ending the drug war. My platform is end the drug war. I am tired of us right here in Cedar Rapids buying bullets for people in Afghanistan that shoot our troops. I am tired of us right here in Cedar Rapids buying, sending money, printing money and sending it to North Korea so that they can build nuclear-armed missiles aimed at us. So, yeah, of course marijuana is going to be legalized, but that's not my issue. I really don't care that much about marijuana. I care about the drug war. It's horrible. It's destroying the country and the world, and we need to stop. After that happens, after we all understand that, and I don't expect anybody to believe me without a lot of talk, and I am more than willing to hear all of the kickback you can give me. You know, hit me hard. If I can't convince you, then I don't want to make it happen. But I believe I can. And when we've done that, we will be in the position that all of us, working together, can figure out the best way to do things like, what do we do with the government that said that we have to arrest you if you're smoking marijuana? Well, the law is the law. But I think we have more important things to do. I think we have a lot of other very important things to do, and we just might not get around to enforcing that one because it's counterproductive to what we really want to do. It doesn't help us protect and serve. Our job is to protect and serve. That's what we need to do. And I will work my hardest to get everybody on board, every single person in law enforcement, and many, many, many community leaders as well. Let's end the drug war so that we can start being a community of really good people.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner.
Well, this much I can tell you is that we are actively fighting people that are involved in the drug trade. And I'll admit this much, in that I don't know that we're terribly successful. I don't know that I would go to the extent to say that I want to stop the drug war and then not have any more information than that to base those claims. But I can tell you that I think that what I'm seeing right now, what we're seeing in our jail right now, is another revolving door. I talked earlier about the revolving door of mentally ill. We also have the revolving door of people that commit crimes that either are on drugs or they're committing crimes in order to reap profit from those crimes to purchase drugs. And I know that what we're doing right now isn't working. When I spoke with the Gazette editorial board the other day, they asked me a candid question as far as what do I think is the answer, and I wish I had the answer. I think that treatment programs certainly are the answer. I know that drug courts are now coming about. They're making some use of those. I think if we expand that, that would be a good thing. There are clearly people that need to be in jail, in my opinion, because of drugs, because they sell drugs, because the drugs that they sell kill people, because they know they have the intent to actually distribute drugs that are laced with such toxicity that they know anyone that takes them are going to die. Hence the reason for the heroin task force that we have. People are dying consuming heroin. What we're looking for is the distributors. And sometimes the easiest way to get to the distributors is to find the end user and then trail it back that way. That's why we have a deputy that's specifically attached to work with the local DEA task force. And that deputy is working to make sure that we go after the kingpins in the drug trade. And we try to seize or end the source of the drugs, not the end user necessarily, but sometimes you have to get to the end user, get them into treatment to go after the people that are actually supplying the drugs to begin with.
Okay, thank you. One of the unfortunate byproducts of drug use is gun use. And so, Mr. Gardner, what would you do to reduce gun violence in our area? And do you favor waiting periods for handgun and or assault weapon purchases?
Well, currently, the state of Iowa requires that you have a permit to purchase for handgun purchases. So you have to come to me, you fill out the form, and you're not able to meet either a state or a federal prohibitor in order to get that permit. Iowa's gun laws changed back in 2010. It went from a may issue to a shall issue state. What that did was take all the discretion away from the sheriffs, and that if you do not meet a prohibitor, then I'm statutorily required to issue you a permit. Once that takes place, my hands are tied. I have no other involvement. Long guns you actually purchase right from the dealer. They go through what's referred to as a NICS check through a dealer, and you can go ahead and make that purchase after the NICS check comes back. Part of the problem we have with drugs/weapons is the availability. And this is a really, really simple thing, yet it's a really, really stupid thing that happens almost on a daily basis in this county, in that people are getting into unlocked vehicles, or they're getting into unlocked homes, and they're stealing handguns and long guns that are readily accessible. Now, I have to think that a responsible gun owner would have the smarts to lock a weapon up when they're not there with it. That you would lock the weapon up and not leave it in your unopened vehicle parked out in the middle of your driveway, and just leave the gun either in your back seat or in your glove box, thinking that that in of itself is secure. If you're going to be a responsible gun owner, I think you have the responsibility to ensure that if you're not carrying that weapon, that you have it safeguarded somewhere and locked up. And that's one of the biggest problems that we currently have, is the easy accessibility, because people just don't take the common sense to lock the darn things up. Beyond that, again, because of the laws that we have, I don't have a whole lot of control anymore. I will tell you that I'm a proponent of shall issue. I actually implemented it before it became law in 2010, but at that point in time, sheriffs still had the ability to have discretion. We could say if a person is not a law-abiding citizen, if they have a large criminal record, maybe it's not in the public interest, the public's best interest, to issue them a permit that says they can go out and purchase and or carry a handgun.
Okay, I'm going to take a point of personal privilege here. There is a question on the shall issue. And so I'm going to give you another minute, and I will give you 3 minutes if you would like to take them to answer both these questions. Would you change the shall issue language in the gun permit process if you could, and why?
While I have been a proponent of shall issue, I think that once sheriffs lost all discretion, that it took a step back in providing public safety. And I've been vocal about this from the very beginning. I campaigned for this back in 2008, and I've maintained this since the 2010 law came out. There's a couple issues attached to the current shall issue law that makes me uncomfortable as the person who signs off on the permits. Number one is that the training requirement is pretty much non-existent. What the training requirement says is that you have to be able to provide training, and training, all it says is you need an NRA instructor to say that you've been provided it. It can be over the internet. They don't even verify your identity. I could have a friend take it for me and never held a gun, never fired a gun, never shot a gun, and still pass this test. Open carry is a concern for me. You can publicly carry your weapons in public view, which is concerning because there's no tactical advantage of that. Also, you can consume alcohol while carrying a weapon. You can consume alcohol right up to the point of intoxication, just shy of point of intoxication, and still be legal.
Okay, thank you. Would you like me
Can
to
you repeat the whole
Yes,
question?
I will.
You know what? I've forgotten 99% of it.
I was just going to ask if you wanted me to do that. What would you do to reduce gun violence in our area? And do you favor waiting periods for handgun and or assault weapon purchases? And if you would like to also address the shall issue, you may do so. And I will give you 3 minutes.
Sure. Okay, one of the things that somebody said, and I don't know if it was you or you, but they said, you know, drugs somehow or another get involved with guns, and that's just not true, okay? There's one drug that is very dangerous, and especially around guns, and Brian just told you about it, okay? That's alcohol, the legal one. There is nothing worse than drunks and guns. And if you go to any respectable range, they will say right there, you drink one beer, you can't shoot the rest of the day, right? You do not shoot on a range if you've had a beer. That's a pretty good attitude. That's not a law, that's just what the range tells you. The drug war is what causes guns. It's not the drugs. I mean, just hang out with a whole bunch of people doing a whole lot of drugs and tell me how violent they are. No, okay? Alcohol is the violence drug. The rest of them are different kinds of drugs. But all of the stuff you've heard about PCP and these superhuman strength and that is such public myth. It's unbelievable. Alcohol is the most dangerous drug, and that's where the guns come from. The drug war is a creator of violence for very obvious reasons. You don't have to think about it too hard, but the people who sell things illegally can't go to the sheriff and have him enforce their contracts. So they have to enforce them themselves. They don't get, he's supposed to be a monopoly on deadly force. He won't protect them and their business transactions, so they take deadly force themselves. That's what happened in Prohibition. Certainly you've watched on television The Untouchables. That's true. It's not artificial. Al Capone was invented from whole cloth. The mafia was invented from whole cloth. When you prohibit something that people want to do, the criminals come in and take over the operation. That's what happened with alcohol. That's what happened with drugs. So I don't see any connection whatsoever with drugs and guns. I see a connection with drug war and guns. Get rid of the drug war, you'll eliminate a whole heck of a lot of homicides. One estimate in New York City was that they would have eliminated 60% of the homicides in the city during the crack epidemic if they just had not had a drug war. So that's the best way to get rid of the drug or the gun problem. So the question really was, what are we going to do about the shootings here? And that's the kind of stuff that all of us should be talking about very seriously. For me to pretend like I have an answer to why a 14-year-old kid who lives on my block, that happened at the end of my alley, chose to shoot a 13-year-old friend in the head on, I believe it was a Tuesday morning. I don't know, but I do know that kid is not a bad guy. He's a good kid that did a horrible thing. And we need to understand that. We need to understand that the bad guys are not the 14-year-old kid that shot a girl in the head.
Okay.
I guess, did I get my extra minute? Because I didn't say anything about
Yeah, you
waiting
did.
list. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Okay, you may.
It's hard to count when you're
I know.
talking.
Okay, so this is for you, Mr. Stewart. What is or should be the protocol for an officer when the person they have stopped says they have a permit to carry a concealed weapon? What should the protocol for an officer be?
That's a great question, and I am totally unprepared for that question, so I'm going to just take it from the top of my head, and if I'm wrong, I'm going to be wrong on camera. My response when somebody says they have a permit is like, great. That means you're a pretty honest guy. I know the criminal doesn't have a permit. If you've got a permit, I'm safe. That's not exactly what your reaction is, your visceral reaction when you see somebody that you already are a little, thinking about it, and they're like they're packing heat. You don't exactly go, oh, my best friend. But the truth of it is, law enforcement is a dangerous profession, but we need to be the bravest profession too. Sometimes bravery is doing the right thing instead of the safe thing. We need to be brave enough to say, great, you've got a gun, you've got a permit, not a problem. If there's a situation that requires additional information or additional action after that, that's something that you're going to have to deal with at the time. I don't believe in protocols. A protocol is a rule. A rule is something that you always have to follow or you get slapped. I don't want to give people rules because I want them to use individual judgment. Because individual judgment will make mistakes, no doubt about it. I make mistakes, everyone here makes mistakes. That's what individual judgment does. But rules make more mistakes because rules become rules instead of good common sense. I trust everybody to exercise their best judgment in every situation. I don't want to write rules. I want to get people to the point where we all trust each other, and when we make a mistake, we don't fire people for making a mistake. We work harder to figure out why the mistake was made.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner?
For quite some time now, we have trained all of our employees to just assume that someone has a weapon with them. That is one of the questions that we first ask someone when we make a traffic stop is, do you have any weapons on you? And we strongly encourage folks who have a permit, who are carrying a weapon, to tell us that. And I actually agree with what Rick said. If we know that you have a permit, chances are pretty good that you've gone through the vetting process. And you're at least smart enough to tell us that, hey, I have a permit, I'm carrying a weapon. Normally it ends there. It just kind of increases our awareness. Most contact we have with people are pretty mundane, whether you're receiving a citation or a traffic stop or whatever, or we go to a call for service to your home perhaps even. You say, hey, just so you know, I'm carrying a weapon. That's just great thinking on the public person's part, because they want the officer to have this awareness that, hey, just so you don't get caught off guard, I'm carrying a gun. I have a permit. So we certainly encourage the public when they are carrying a weapon, when they have an issued a permit, to let us know that, so that there aren't any surprises. We all act better when there aren't any surprises in our interaction. So this is a pretty easy question as far as we strongly encourage, if you're carrying a weapon, to tell us. We want to know that up front. That's usually where it ends. We continue whatever the reason is for our interaction and go from there. Only if you're going to be arrested or taken into custody does it add one additional step to the process.
Okay, thank you. We're going to change subjects a little bit now. And so, Mr. Gardner, this question is for you. Please comment on the use of surplus military equipment in the Linn County Sheriff's Office. Is this equipment appropriate? And if not, what should be done with it?
We have very little. One of the first things that we did acquire, and this was back before I was sheriff, were military surplus rifles. And we stopped using those shortly after I took office. And I tell you what, when you volunteer to take something off of the federal government's hand, it's difficult to give back, because we literally had them locked into a room in our building until just this past year when we could finally give them back to them. I had over 40 rifles sitting downstairs in the shipping boxes that we couldn't get rid of because they had no place to take them, no one else that wanted them. But aside from the rifles, we really don't have a whole lot. We don't have an MRAP, we don't have an armored personnel carrier, we don't have much of anything anymore. We may have some ballistic helmets that our SWAT team may still use. We may have, there for a while we even bought like cabinets to put cleaning supplies in for military, but we don't have any of these high dollar items that you may hear other departments talking about. We just haven't had the need or the desire to purchase them, to store them, to maintain them, to utilize them. So we have very little military surplus equipment.
Mr. Stewart?
Well, there's a psychological thing here. The real question is, do we want law enforcement to perceive themselves as big and tough and the good guys fighting the bad guys, or do we want law enforcement to perceive themselves as being the courageous people who are better trained and better equipped and better able to maintain law and order and protect and serve than the people who haven't done the job that we do? And I don't think that anybody will. I admire people that ship stuff back to the government. The government was nefarious purposes to send it to us in the first place. It's not really a question of what equipment you have. It's a question of what you think you are. If you think you're the military, you should join the military. If you think you're law enforcement, you don't need that stuff, because we're not in a war. It's us. The people that we serve and protect are not the enemy, and they're not the bad guys. They're us. They're just like you and me. So that's the whole war mentality and the bad guy mentality and the tough guy mentality. Hey, I like being tough. There's nothing I like better. I've shot machine guns. It's a heck of a lot of fun. I've thrown a grenade. That wasn't so much fun. That's not what police are there to do on a daily basis. We're protecting and we're serving our neighbors.
Okay, thank you. Another kind of turn in the kind of questions. This one has to do with budgetary concerns. Why should taxpayers be responsible for making up a $1.3 million budget shortfall if you stop policing for profit and stop billing inmates for room and board and court fines and fees? That's to you, Mr. Stewart.
Well, that's a moral issue. The taxpayers apparently told you to lock this guy up, and the taxpayers should pay for it. There is no debate that you can't lock somebody up for something that they didn't mind doing themselves. They didn't hurt anybody. They were smoking a joint. They were drinking on the public sidewalk. They were doing all kinds of low-level crimes. They weren't bothering anybody except somebody else, the taxpayer. The taxpayer elected a politician. The politician hired well, he didn't hire a sheriff, but hired the law enforcement and said, arrest this person, bad behavior, put him in jail. But I don't want to pay for it. That is a moral question. Not to mention the fact that it's entirely regressive. Take the rich guy, put him in jail, charge him $80 for room and board, no big deal. Take the poor guy, who is much more likely to be arrested for a variety of reasons, and it has nothing but, I'm not saying that law enforcement tries to do that, but that is what happens. That $80 is a heck of a lot of money if you're working at McDonald's. You might lose your job because you can't work at McDonald's when you're in the jail. There's a cycle of repetition here that we need to break out of. And we the $1.3 million, if taxpayers don't want to pay it, I guess they don't want us to put people in jail. It's pretty simple. So don't put them in jail.
Okay, Mr. Gardner.
Well, in direct response to the question, we wouldn't have that issue because I wouldn't do away with that system. We do have a room and board system in which all criminal defendants, once they are convicted, are required to pay back to us $60 per day for their confinement. And what my predecessor, Sheriff Zeller, went to the legislature, actually was a proponent for this specific legislation, and got the law passed where jails can charge those that utilize and perhaps abuse the system rather than have it rest on taxpayers' shoulders. So if you are convicted of an offense, if you are convicted and sentenced to serve jail time, you will get a bill from us when you walk out of the building for $60 per day. That's the law. That's the way the ordinance reads after the law. And we understand that there are some folks that utilize the system, abuse the system to such extent that they are never going to pay us. We know that. But we also know that if we have a person that makes a mistake, they're arrested once, perhaps twice, for an offense or offenses, and they've learned their lesson, want to move beyond it, they're more likely to pay than other people are. So again, if you have someone that utilizes this system, why not make them pay for it and pay us the $60 per day for their incarceration, with the understanding there's going to be folks that you may never get paid for their confinement. That's fine. That's just the way the ball bounces. But I do think that if you've committed a crime, if you're convicted of that crime, if you're sentenced to serve time in jail, you do have an obligation to pay for that time in jail, just as much as you would restitution or anything else for that matter.
Okay, thank you. Then also along those lines, Mr. Gardner, will you still house federal prisoners? And if not, what will you do to make up for that additional multi-million-dollar shortfall?
Well, we do house federal prisoners. We have housed federal prisoners, for some time. I'm grabbing a piece of paper here to let you know that last year alone, the federal government paid us a little over $2.7 million to house their prisoners. And had they not given that money to us, they would have given it to someone else. So obviously, in the proximity that we are to the Northern District Federal Courthouse, the proximity that we are with the U.S. Marshals Service, the FBI, the DEA, Homeland Security, it just makes sense for us, since we have the room, to house their prisoners. And the federal government pays us $64.70 per day per inmate to house those folks. They roughly make up anywhere between 1/2 and 1/3 of our inmates. And again, as I just pointed out, that's $2.7 million that the federal government pays us to house their inmates. As a matter of convenience for them, we have the room, we have the space, we're able to bring in that extra revenue. And what that revenue does, much in the same way that the room and board does, that we talked about earlier, is that offsets your tax askings that we have to operate our business, our sheriff's office. That money goes back to the general fund, but then that's applied as revenue against our operation. So if we didn't have the $2.7 million worth of federal room and board, or the $450,000 worth of local room and board, then you as taxpayers would be asked to make up that money. You'd be asked to increase your tax amount that you pay it, the county taxes, to make up for that amount. So I think that it's wise to accept those federal dollars. It's a convenience certainly for the U.S. Marshal Service, who's responsible for the safekeeping of their inmates. We have the only jail in Linn County. There is no other jail. Whether you're arrested for a local, a county, a state, or a federal offense, you are brought to the Linn County Jail, as we have the only jail in the county.
Mr. Stewart?
I have no problem with accepting federal money. I have a real problem with what Brian just said, which is that we look at running a jail as a profit center. It's not. That's not where our money comes from, and it should never come from that. Now, am I going to refuse the federal dollars when they send a prisoner over? No, I'm not. But I'm going to work with the attorneys and the government to try and minimize that, because that's not the goal of society, to incarcerate as many people as possible so that we can pay our bills. That is a fundamentally flawed perspective on the job of law enforcement. Now, it's unfortunate that the jailer's position comes with the sheriff. You know, it's too bad that we have to do that. And there is a budget, and all of these things need to be thought about carefully. I'm a numbers guy, and I know how to save money, and I know how to spend money. But I'm a moral person too, and I will not view a jail as a profit center. Period, because that's not what it's all about. The only reason for a jail. There's two reasons for a jail. Profit is not one of them. Vengeance is not one of them. The reason for a jail is to protect the people that aren't in jail from the person who is in jail. That's the number one reason. If the person who is in the jail is a threat to society, a real threat to society, then we need to keep them there so that we are protecting you. But there's another reason. It's called deterrence. We want to prevent future crimes. And that's a science, and it's an imperfect science. But there is no reasonable explanation for using jail as any kind of a profit center whatsoever. If you want law and you want justice, you need to pay for it, and that's called taxes.
Okay, thank you. All right, this is for you, Mr. Stewart. You don't set the mandatory sentencing, but do you have an opinion on whether or not mandatory sentences are effective, and where do you stand on sentencing for non-violent offenses?
No, you're right. I don't set mandatory sentences. It goes back to what I just said. You know, the reason for a sentence is a little bit of punishment. Okay, there's a little bit of punishment there, but there's never vengeance. Vengeance has nothing to do with what law enforcement's job is. You are trying to deter future crime, and you're trying to isolate people who are actively a threat. That's the purpose of the system. I forgot exactly what the question was.
Basically, do you have an opinion on whether or not these are
Mandatories,
effective?
yeah.
And
No, it's mandatory sentences are ridiculous. They didn't like the sentences that some judges were handing out because they varied widely from one spot to the next. And so they said, well, that's not fair, right? And there's both sides. They said, we have to bring him down here, we have to bring him up here. What that did was that took judgment away from, guess who? Judges. It's not a mistake that the word is judge. They're supposed to judge. They're supposed to use their reasoning in order to apply to a case. And yes, they make mistakes. Mandatory sentences are worse. Mandatory sentences gave politicians the right to pile on to get votes, regardless of the justice, regardless of the deterrent effect. Mandatory sentences was what politicians sold a bunch of people because they wanted you to vote for them, because they just wanted to stay in office. They've never worked, they'll never work, and they need to be eliminated immediately. And the best way to do it is, maybe we just shouldn't charge the guy. Maybe we have a better idea. Maybe we can solve our problems locally, and we don't need Washington to tell us how long the guy's going to spend in prison at an enormous expense, because we don't want to pay the bill for that stupidity.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gardner.
Well, I think that there are certainly times when mandatory minimums should come into play. You look at forcible felonies. You look at first-degree murder. You look at the first-degree arson. You look at those that result in death, intentional death. And certainly I think we should have mandatory minimums when those situations occur. But if you look at what the courts are doing currently, there has been a reduction in some mandatory minimums. They have found that perhaps that the situations have allowed them to be overused. So I think that there probably are situations where you could reduce the number of mandatory minimums you have for certain offenses, but I staunchly support their use for forcible felonies resulting in death. I think that it does come down to retribution to some point. It comes down to punishment at some point in time. But more importantly, it comes down to safeguarding the public from these offenders who literally have no respect for life and have done these offenses intentionally with the result of death.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Gardner, as sheriff, would you be willing and able to take on an auxiliary task of helping U.S. military veterans who have been psychologically damaged by their experience of violence to prevent such violence from being inflicted on family or community, and how would you do it?
Well, I'm certainly supportive of the concept. I just don't know that the sheriff is the right person to do this any more than I think the sheriff is the right person to provide mental health treatment to those people that are in jail. So I'm not sure if I'm missing the point of the question or if I'm off. I apologize to whoever wrote the question, but I certainly think that people with mental illness, especially our veterans, who certainly have given all to their country, and for whatever reason, usually experience-based, I'd have to admit, have come out of the situation with some concerns, some mental health concerns. So obviously we owe these folks to make sure that they receive proper treatment. I'm just not so sure, and again, if I understand the question correctly, and I apologize if I don't, I'm just not so sure that the sheriff is the appropriate person to help provide that mental health training. Certainly I would support, we have had veterans in Linn County that were in need, that we dealt with and have dealt with and will continue to deal with, that have needed mental health treatment. And we have worked as best we can with the veterans groups to try to get these folks into counseling, into treatment. We have been in contact with the VA in Iowa City. There's a couple well-publicized incidents that have occurred in Linn County that almost led to deadly or lethal force encounters that thankfully our folks were smart enough to be able to recognize the issue. Even though they haven't been provided the crisis intervention training, on their own they recognized it, on their own they were able to take interaction to stop these encounters from becoming lethal. And I'm talking about military veterans that had mental health issues that were armed with weapons and they were going to use those weapons against our folks. So anything that we can do to help those folks that come back from the military that have mental health issues, I absolutely are supportive in helping to get whatever treatment that we could possibly have.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart?
It's the drug war. If you haven't figured it out, let me explain. There's no cure for PTSD. There is no cure for PTSD except ecstasy. You know, the party drug, 83% permanent cure rate if you have 2 or 3 sessions with a trained therapist using ecstasy. That research was done decades ago, and the drug war stopped it in its tracks. And we can't even talk about it today. We don't dare say that we should allow veterans to use ecstasy because that would be, what, teaching our young people that drugs are okay? I call BS on that. It is a cure in 83% of the cases. It's $1 trillion problem if you don't use it. The estimate for how much it's going to cost us to work through all of the PTSD cases which we've got right now, it lasts forever. $1 trillion, or 2 or 3 sessions with a trained therapist with ecstasy. Which one of those makes any sense whatsoever? It's a slam dunk. I don't see how anybody can't see that. And don't forget, why do they have PTSD? They have PTSD because we sent them to a war in Afghanistan that was paid for with drug war money. That's where the Taliban got their money. That's where Osama bin Laden got their money. That's what we did. We created a situation with the drug war where they had to go and fight, and they came back, and now we're not even going to let them have medicine. That's insanity. And you can't stop this kind of stuff until you all agree that the drug war has got to go.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stewart, point
A
zero.
calm question, please. Please, a calm question.
Not sure this is, but I'll give it my best shot. .08 is the legal limit of drinking, but driver's license for Class A has a limit of .04. So if you carry a concealed gun, should .04 be the legal limit for drinking?
Oh my God, there's too many numbers in there. Could you have a spreadsheet? Okay, well, let me, oh gosh. You know, there is absolutely no doubt that this extremely dangerous drug, which we legalized because it made more sense than making it illegal, causes a lot of damage in society. And one of the biggest places where it causes damage is when fools and their liquor get behind the steering wheel of a car. Now, I know that's going to be completely wiped out. It's obvious that there's not going to be any OWI once we have self-driving cars and trucks, because those self-driving cars and trucks aren't going to be drinking. You can drink all you want in a self-driving car. And that's the long-term solution. It's going to disappear. How do we get from here to there? Well, the first thing you do is you invite the people who are inventing these things to come to Iowa, right here in Linn County, and start their experiments so that we can get more action on it so that we can solve the problem sooner. All we have to do is advance the date that the self-driving cars are here by 1 year. And how many deaths do we save? In Iowa, I believe it was 89 alcohol-related fatalities last year. 89 deaths per year. I know we're not there, okay? And all these numbers are hard because you got to do something and you're stuck with, it's a rule, right? I don't like rules, but I also don't like drunks behind wheels. Uber. We can work Uber into this too. The best way to get a drunk from not driving is make sure Uber is hanging out right in front of their face when they're leaving the bar. Truck drivers, you know what? If you're earning your living driving a truck, you shouldn't be drinking, period. Wait until it's gone. It probably ought to be close to zero. You've got too many pounds behind you. That thing goes off the road. No, I'm not interested in cleaning up that mess, and there's a lot of people can get killed because of your stupidity, and I don't like stupidity.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner.
Before shall issue took place in 2010, sheriffs in Iowa had the ability to condition permits, put restrictions on permits. And one of the more common restrictions that sheriffs across the 99 counties put down was that the permit was not valid if you were consuming alcohol. And the reason for that is that, as has been established here by both of us, is that alcohol and weapons don't mix. Now, I can tell you how this law came about because I was a member of the legislative committee for the Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association. When they were revamping the law in 2010 to the shall issue, it came up that, hey, the sheriffs pretty much statewide have always conditioned their permits, or the majority have conditioned the permits, that you can't consume alcohol when carrying the weapon. We should include that as part of the language. And the lawmakers themselves said no, because if I want to have a glass of wine before at a meal, I don't have to secure my weapon. I want to be able to keep my weapon on me, have a glass of wine with dinner. Well, maybe a glass of wine isn't such a bad idea, but they couldn't identify how much is that then? Is it 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, or 0.01, 1.02, whatever? So they just left it to, we already have a presumptive level of intoxication in the state of Iowa at 0.08. Now the 0.04 that we talked about is for commercial truck drivers. They can only meet the 0.04 threshold. So I can tell you, based on my experience on the legislative committee, based on my experience in the legislature, it's not going to change, it's not going to go down. They fought very hard to get the law the way that it is, to allow you to consume alcohol and carry your weapons just shy of the point of intoxication. You heard it from me already. I used to condition the permits that said not valid when consuming alcohol. So that's the standard that my folks internally, that's my internal standard for my deputy sheriffs. You are not allowed to carry a weapon if you're consuming alcohol.
Okay, thank you. We've got two more questions here. And this one is for Mr. Gardner. How do you feel about dismantling the homeless camp? And where is it permissible for them to live when facilities are full?
Well, we assist in the homeless population surveys that they do annually. And I can tell you that the majority of the homeless folks are living in the Cedar Rapids metropolitan area, far more so than live out in the county, in the area that I'm primarily responsible for providing law enforcement protection. So in Linn County, I am unaware of any homeless camps that I'm directly responsible for providing law enforcement security for. So I don't know that I can provide you with an educated answer to this question, whoever it is that asked. If I were a Cedar Rapids police chief or a Cedar Rapids police officer, I could probably answer that more intelligently because they would have dealt with that on a more frequent basis. When we find someone that is homeless in Linn County, they're usually just kind of one-offs. It's maybe a person or a family. It's not usually a group of people living in a homeless camp. And we do everything that we possibly can with social service agencies to try to find them temporary placement, temporary home. We've even gone so far, in fact, I know that one of my commanders that's here today went and took out of his own pocket money to pay for a hotel room for a homeless family, I believe it was, just to get them off the street because it was the right thing to do. So I apologize for not having the better answer as far as relocating homeless camps, only because the Linn County Sheriff's Office hasn't had that much experience with that, where I think the more appropriate question is for the city of Cedar Rapids and how they're dealing with that. And quite honestly, we haven't participated in that project. So I apologize. Whoever brought the question forward, I'm certainly willing to talk to you afterward to see if I'm missing something here. But based on the survey information that we do annually, the homeless population is not typically out in the county because they're further away from resources. They're normally here centrally located.
Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, I don't know anything, so let me talk for 2 minutes. We have a problem in America. We have a problem that we're trying to pretend that we don't have problems. And the truth of it is that we've sort of done it by trying to arrest people and then get them out of our sight so we can have a pretty scene around us. I spend a lot of time in Guatemala where I have a permanent apartment, and every day I walk over the prostrate bodies of at least a half a dozen drunks from the night before. They have literally passed out on the street. And I'm just talking within a 1 or 2 block radius of my house. That's the way it is. And you just walk around them, and you recognize them, and nobody pays them any attention whatsoever. In the winter, when it gets super cold, they go around and they pick them up so they don't freeze to death. In America, we arrest them and put them in jail and charge them room and board, and then we claim that the taxpayers don't want to pay it. It's not just that. I just use that as an example. But homeless, really? Homeless? We should have a place for homeless people to camp if they don't want to stay in a shelter. We should provide running water. We should probably put up some tents in case they don't have their own. There's a lot of mental illness in homeless. That's really where it all sort of started. You know, we threw them out of the government institutions. We threw them on the streets, and then we complain because we have homeless people. We're not the only ones. Rich people always don't like to see the riffraff, and we pass laws against them. I'm completely and totally against that because it destroys our own humanity. They are us. They need to be served and protected, and we need to do it. And if we're not willing to pay to do it, then we shouldn't be complaining about it. And we sure as heck shouldn't be asking law enforcement to lock them up. No, absolutely not.
Okay, we've come to the end of our time for answering questions. There are still a couple that have come in late. And so if your question was not answered, both candidates will be available after this forum is completed because we have another forum that immediately succeeds this. So we need to get this one wrapped up. As a toss of the coin, Mr. Stewart is going to go first with closing remarks, followed by Mr. Gardner.
Well, I think you've seen that there's, in one hand, very little difference between Brian and I. And on the other hand, there's a huge difference. I think that difference really only boils down to one thing. I've spent a lot of time, a huge part of my life, studying the effects of the drug war. The very first paper I ever wrote in 8th grade, my first term paper, was on heroin. And I have been intensely interested in the drug problem ever since. There is no intellectually honest argument in favor of the war on drugs. The Economist magazine had a debate between two very intelligent people 2 years ago, and the readers get to vote, and 92% of them agreed that marijuana should be legal everywhere. The people who think about this understand how devastating the drug war is, how we can never win it, how it costs us trillions of dollars, and how it destroys people's lives. I would love to have Brian working in the sheriff's department for another 8 years. And I would love to see him take this ball and run with it as hard as I'm gonna. Because I don't need the job. I just feel my heart ripped out every time I hear about the bad news of the drug war. And I can't stand by and let that happen. We need to stop the war on drugs. And until we do, none of the problems of law enforcement, of which I really don't think Linn County has that many, but those problems can't be solved unless we stop the war on drugs. That's the cold, harsh reality of how bad it is. You don't have the money, it doesn't work, it destroys lives all over this country and all over the world. Let's quit.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner.
Again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here tonight and taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in this activity with us. I do think that it's important, like I said, for you to hear the viewpoints of the candidates so you can make an informed decision. I understand the responsibility of being Linn County Sheriff. I have done this job for 36 years. I have filled this role for 8 years. I'm looking forward to serving this role in at least another 4 years as your Linn County Sheriff. I truly understand what needs to happen as a law enforcement leader in order to develop my employees and allow them to provide the best public service that we possibly can provide to the citizens of Linn County. And I can tell you that I would put my agency up with any other agency in the state or the nation for that matter, because I have a great group of men and women that are providing those services to you. Unlike my opponent, I understand that he is better suited to serve in a legislature somewhere, because I don't legislate. I follow the law. The law tells me what to do. I take an oath as sheriff, my employees take an oath as deputies to support and comply with the Constitution and the laws of the state of Iowa. I don't make laws, I just enforce them. The legislature develops the laws. And based on what I understand Rick to say, I think he would be better suited to go after it in that regard, and perhaps he'd have a better understanding, a better success rate. I understand, however, what it's like to be your sheriff. I understand what your needs are. I've lived in Linn County my entire life. I've raised a family in Linn County. I'm going to be here for a long time. So I would certainly appreciate your vote to allow me to continue to do this job, to continue to provide you with the best possible services to the citizens of Linn County. And for that, I appreciate your vote, and I thank you all for being here tonight.
Let's give everybody a... I'd like to close this forum before we open the next forum by thanking both Rick Stewart and Brian Gardner not only for being here tonight, but for your dedication and your willingness to run for public office. This is not an easy thing. Not only is it not easy to run for public office, but it's not easy being a public servant. And so for people like them to put themselves forward for your consideration is a huge, huge effort on their part. And I want to congratulate you both for doing that.
Thanks, Lynn.
I also like to thank Kirkwood for providing this facility. And to the voters, if you haven't already done so, please don't forget to vote. We do have one last forum that will be held next Wednesday night. It will be District 70 State Representative Forum, and it will be held at Taft Middle School from 7 to 8:30. So if you are in District 70 Representative District and you would like to hear from those candidates, please be there at Taft. In the meantime, if you would like to stay, we are now going to change our seats here, and we have two people who are running for Linn County Supervisor from District number 2. So please stay if you wish. If you do not wish, you may exit at this time.